This conference is now being recorded.
Welcome to the New York State Association of School Business Officials webinar. Today's program is Monthly Planner March Edition, Guidance on IDEA Billing. Your host for today is Donna Clement, Director of Professional Development with New York State ASBO. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. You may send chat questions during your presentation using the chat window indicated by speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. Please address chat questions to the Q&A group using a drop-down list located at the bottom of the chat window. I will now turn the call over to our host. Donna, please begin.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone. I know the first slide doesn't say guidance on IDEA billing, but certainly that's what this webinar is, and we are talking about reimbursement for special ed, and particularly for the non-resident parentally placed non-public school students with disabilities. And we have two presenters. We have Pat Geary, and she's coordinator with special ed for State Education Department, and we certainly appreciate Pat being here today. And we also have Joe DiBartello, and he's the business administrator with Hewlett-Woodmere Union Free School District. And Joe is going to share some of his reports and the kinds of things that he has set up, because sometimes billing issues are a problem. So we thank both presenters. Make sure you ask questions. Use the chat area. And I'm going to turn the program over to Pat, who's going to start with her information.
Well, good afternoon. I hope everybody is not covered in snow. I have with me also Bruce Jaslowski, who is with our state aid office, and Barbara Miller, who is also from our special ed office, so that during the question and answer time, if some of your questions go beyond my scope of knowledge, I'll be able to turn to others, my colleagues here, to be as responsive as we can to any questions that you have. I don't know how much background everybody has with regard to this issue around special education services when parents place their children in private schools, non-public schools, elementary and secondary schools. Back when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was reauthorized in 2004, there was a major change to that law that moved the responsibility for child find or evaluations and special ed services to the district, school district, where that non-public elementary or secondary school is located. And as a result, particularly because New York State had long had a history of providing IEP level or higher level of services than many other states in the nation and greater than what is actually required under federal law, it required us to make a series of changes to our state law and our regulations to be able to conform to the federal requirement, placing the responsibility on the school district where that non-public school is located, and to do it in a way that is fiscally a responsible way so that the school districts of location were able to recoup the majority of their costs for this requirement. So primarily I'm going to be talking about the different processes that are in place under the state law and under state regulations for the school district where the public to be able to recover certain costs from the school district where the child's parents reside. And this slide just gives you the legal references, which may be important for you to know, and which I'll speak to periodically. I'll preface this somewhat by also letting you know that last year, and again this year, we are going to be proposing legislatively some changes to this process. I don't know if they'll actually go through. They it didn't pass last year, but not a whole lot passed last year. So through the legislature. So we are going to be reintroducing some changes. So we may have to, if that goes through, I think it'll be an easier process for school districts. But I'm going to speak to you today about what is currently under the law and Regulation 4 requirements. To frame the discussion, there are 5 major topics that I will provide you with information on. You'll see the first 2 have to deal with different processes that are in place depending on whether or not the parent of the child, provides consent to the school district of location, the school district providing the special ed services, to share special education information about their child with the school district where the parent resides. That is actually a federal requirement, and so because that is a federal requirement, without parent consent, the 2 districts couldn't be sharing information about what type of special ed services the child was getting, or whether they were even getting special ed services from the school district of location. So that federal requirement led us to set up 2 very different processes for the district of location to recoup its costs from the district of residence. So that's the first 2. The third one is under the law, we are required to have a mechanism in place when there is a dispute between the district of residence and the district of location about the claim and the cost. And so I'll talk to you about that. And because residency of the student is such a key factor here, you want to make sure that you are billing the right district back for those services. The law addressed specifically information about how you can participate in residency determinations. And then lastly, how all of this is different if the child who's in that school, non-public school, happens to be a student who resides outside of the state. So those are the 5 topics that I will cover. This slide just gives you a number of acronyms that you're going to see on the various slides throughout. So just so refer to this and know what they are. DOL will be district of location, and district DOR, district of residence. So you can, hopefully you've printed your slides and you can reference this back if you don't know what something is. So the first process that we have in place, when a parent has provided consent between the 2 districts to share special education information about their child, the law basically says that you, district of location, can now bill that district of residence for the cost of certain services. And those certain services include the evaluation of the child, the CSE administration, and the special education services. Excuse me. The law later goes on to say that the amount that you charge cannot exceed the actual cost of providing those services to the student after you deduct your federal and state funds and any other expenses that you would be required to deduct. So what this means for the district of location is that you have to be calculating a very student-specific cost for the services that are to be provided. We've given guidance. If you didn't print out our field memos on this, the very last slide that you have gives the web link for our guidance, where we did define what we mean by evaluations, what are allowable costs for Committee on Special Education meetings, and what we mean for costs for providing special ed services. For evaluations, that's basically you have to have a way to prorate the time of the evaluator for the time that they actually spent with the student and the time that they spent in preparing that written report. And one of the questions we've had frequently is, well, on occasions, a parent will go out and have an independent educational evaluation done, and they'll bring that in, and because they disagreed with the evaluation conducted by the school district, they are asking the district to pay for that, and under the law, the district would have to pay for that, or else they'd have to go to an impartial hearing process. So where the district agrees to pay for that, that now becomes part of the evaluation costs that could, in fact, be billed back to the district of residence. For the Committee on Special Education meetings, again, you can only bill for the actual cost for the students. So some students have, an hour meeting, others may have a 2-hour meeting. So you would have to have a way in which you would calculate the actual amount of time and the participants in those committee meetings and to come up with a actual cost for the individual student. We do not, what is excluded in costs that you can charge would be any cost for school attorneys if they're participating in a meeting. So if the district brings their attorney and we would not, you cannot bill that back to the district of residence. And in the event that there's a dispute over the recommendations that are made in the committee and it goes to an impartial hearing, you cannot bill those costs back to the other school district. For the provision of special education services, every student may be getting something different. One student gets something very different than another student, and so you have to look at what are the actual services being and the amount of time, the frequency, the duration of those services, and be able to calculate out that. And you can include travel costs because we do recognize that some of these services may be provided off-site of the school district, so we do allow calculation of travel costs, minus state federal aid that would offset those costs that would be billed back. If several students are receiving the same service, you have to prorate that down to see what that cost would be for the individual student. One of the questions we have been asked frequently is, can you come up with a formula for us to do this, such as when for other non-resident students who would be attending public schools, there's a non-resident formula. In this case, no, there is no formula that you can use, and this is because there's no general education costs here. These are very child-specific costs, and as I said before, one child might get speech and language twice a week, and another child might get much more extensive services 5 times a week, or et cetera. So there's no formula that we can apply here. I think Joe's going to talk later about a formula, but it's not the same kind of formula as I'm talking about here. When we talk about staff costs, can you include salary and fringe? We would expect that would be part of the actual cost prorated down to that service, so you can calculate those on. We've had a number of questions about instead of doing these child-specific costs, could we do regional rates? And our response to that has been yes, but you have to make sure that those regional rates, in reaching those regional rates, you don't end up, for any child, billing the district of residence for any more than the actual cost, because the law limits you to that bill. So I don't know, although we've gotten that question several times, I don't know if any region actually has been able to reach agreement on cost of services. And maybe Joe can speak to any of his experiences on that. We do not require that for purposes of the district of location billing the district of residence, that an actual contract is entered into for that purpose. There are certain revenue sources that have to be deducted from the cost before you build a district of residence. And if you refer to our June 2008 memo, there's a lot of information on what's called the attachment 3. You see that referenced on the slide that walks you through how to actually do that calculation. Another important piece of information with regard to revenue sources that have to be deducted has to do with the proportionate share of the federal funds, IDEA funds. When the IDEA 2004, in the 2004 reauthorization, in addition to shifting responsibility to the school district of location for provision of services, the law also said that along with that goes the amount of federal dollars that would be proportionate to the number of children identified as having a disability enrolled in the non-public schools in your school district, in the boundaries within your school district. So those federal funds have been shifted over the past couple years to the school districts of location. And the manner in which those funds are spent are driven by the requirements in federal law, which talk about, first of all, you can only spend them on parentally placed students with disabilities. If you don't spend all the dollars in one year, you have to roll into the next year and spend them at that time, so you can't use them for any other purpose. And how they're spent is determined based on this consultation process that each district should be having or must have with representatives of non-public schools in their region. The reason that is so important is that if your particular school district says, with the federal funds, we have X amount of dollars, and with these dollars, we're going to say children who need speech and language services will get speech and language therapy using our proportionate share of funds. It's important for you from the billing perspective to know how those funds are being spent, because when you start deducting them from certain bills, you only want to then deduct them consistent with whether those funds were spent on that particular child for the services agreed upon in the consultation process. It's a complex component, but it's an important one for you to know. So that would be a dialogue you would be having with your special ed administrators about how did it end up with the consultation process? How are these funds allocated? So on. And then you also have to have a way to deduct from there any public or private insurance proceeds that you may have, Medicaid or others, that you may have be collecting on these students. So that is the process for the direct billing, and I believe that's the process that Joe's going to speak a lot more in detail and how he's figured out how to, an example of how his district does that. We can go, if you have questions at the end, I'll be happy to answer them from my end. The second part of the process, however, is when the parent does not give consent to share information. And although I don't think this happens on a very frequent basis, you do need to know about it because it could happen. And in that case, we, as a state agency, serve as the vehicle to make sure that the district of location can recoup their costs from the district of location. But you cannot go directly to the district of location because you don't have consent to share any information with that district. And so what you would do instead is submit a claim to us, and we have provided the form on which you would submit that claim and set some prescriptive requirements, similar to what I just explained to you, that we would only be you can only claim for certain costs, actual costs for evaluation, CSE meetings, and IESP, which is Individualized Education Services Program. It's similar to an IEP, but it's specific for parentally placed students. The guidance information that we have provided you in the June 2008 memo gives you detailed information and provides you all the forms that you would need to submit this claim to us, and it's all posted on the state aid website as well as the special education website. It's good. I'm not a business official, so by me saying it's good business practices, but for any billing, you should have traceable, supportable source documents should anything be disputed between the district of location and district of residence. So when where the parent doesn't share consent, we would take the claim here, and then we would, after we verify it, we would then submit that to the Office of the State Controller. They would intercept the funds from the district of residence. We won't be able to tell them who the student is, but we do intercept the funds and then give it back to the district of location. That submission of claims must include certification by someone, an authorized officer from the district of location, a copy of the parent's refusal of consent or certification to that effect from the school district of location, as well as a signed certification by non-public school official where that child is attending, that in fact is the student's address, and that you have the correct district of residence. We would only, the information about parents' consent is important because we only take the claims to SED when we have something that verifies parent refusal of consent. And then we also, in regulation, or certification, right? So it could be the actual parent's consent or certification by the school superintendent that the parent has refused. And the form includes that information. And then there is a deadline for submitting those claims to us, no later than June 30th of the year in which the services were provided. That time frame is important for you to know. I had heard from a number of districts, particularly last year, that they never got bills from the district of location. So you want to pay attention to some of the time limits on the billing process so that you can, in fact, recoup those claims. The third process has to do with disputes of reimbursement claims. And under the state law, we were required to set up a process by which the district of residence could dispute the claim or the bill from the district of location, and that we would be required to review that claim and resolve that dispute. And so in Part 177 of the regulations of the Commissioner is where you would see the regulatory process for the dispute of those claims. And if you look at or print out the field memo dated December 2008, that's the document that would give you detailed information on how to actually dispute the claim itself. Basically, the process for disputing the claim to the State Education Department would be that on the form that we have prescribed for this purpose, you would submit a request to SED, but only submit it after you have documented efforts that that the District of Residence and the District of Location have worked together to resolve this dispute. And that documentation that of your attempts actually have to be explained on the form that comes to us. The request asks specifically why the district of residence is disagreeing with the amount charged. And again, notice that there is a time limit for the disputes to be submitted to us not later than 1 year from the date of the receipt of the claim or 30 days after the final residency determination. And I'll talk more about residency determination later on in the presentation. When SED gets the dispute application, we would turn to the district of location and ask them to provide to us certain information, including certification that the costs that they're billing for represent actual costs, detailed accounting of those costs, and any applicable source documents that they have. We would then do a review of that information and determine whether or not the claim costs were attributable to the non-resident student and that they reflected actual costs. There are certain things that we do not determine in here. We do not determine whether the I think that's on the next slide, but I'll say it now. We don't determine whether these are appropriate special ed services to be provided to the child, or whether you provided more than you should have. If the district of residence may say, you know, we were only giving the child speech twice a week and you're giving it 5 times a week, we don't resolve those disputes. We only look at the amount of the claim and whether it is attributable to the student and reflect actual costs. There are times when the district of residence is disputing only one charge, and so our requirements are that they should not be withholding reimbursement to the district of location for any other costs that are not in dispute. And the district of residence could still dispute the claim even if they've already paid the district of location for those costs. And if we decide upon review that it wasn't, the costs were not actual costs attributable to the student, then we would require the district of location to pay back those costs. And as I mentioned earlier, this is not, our state ed's review of disputes is not to dispute the student's residence or dispute the amount of services provided pursuant to the IESP. Purely a fiscal review. The residency determinations is an important factor here, and so when we revised our regulations, we recognized that it's a district of residents might feel that they've got a bill for a student. They're disputing whether the child actually resides in their school district. And there is a process in regulation that every district knows about on how to make a residency determination for any student where that is questioned. However, in the unique situation where a child is parentally placed, and now you've got this process of the 2 districts involved, and it could impact the district of location's ability to bill the district of residence. We built in a process whereby the district of that we believe is the district of residence has to give the district of location an opportunity to provide evidence that that is in fact the student's residence. And once they make a determination of residency, in the case where the child's parentally placed in another school district, they have to give written notice to the district of location. And in that process, there is an appeal under Section 310 of our law to residency determinations. This now gives the district of location the opportunity to seek a review of a residency determination made by another school district when you believe, for a parentally placed student, when you believe that it is not appropriate. The last topic that I wanted to cover here has to do with children who reside in another state, but who are enrolled by their parents in non-public elementary and secondary schools located in New York State. In this case, the school district of location does have the responsibility to do the evaluations and special ed eligibility determinations and provide special education services to that child. However, in this case, the children get what is called an individual service plan. They do not get the equivalent of an IEP. They don't get the Individualized Education Services Program. They get an ISP. And they only get services based on that proportionate share of the IDEA funds that I talked about earlier. And so you're only spending for services, you're only spending federal dollars on these children. You are not spending any state or local funds for out-of-state students. Therefore, there is no one to bill. You can't bill back to any school district for the costs incurred by that school district of location. There is no chargeback to school districts in the other state. The only exception to that is that there's no exception to the no billing, but the federal funds cannot be used for the evaluations to determine eligibility. So that's something that does come out of the school district of location, and it's not a federal share. So I don't know, depending on where you reside, where your school districts are located, if any of you have children who are from other states or other countries. You know, if you're up north and there's Canada, you know, I know students are enrolled by their parents, they reside in Canada. So other countries or other states, these are the rules. So there's no one to bill back to, and you can't come to the state education department with a claim for any of these students. The services should be limited to the federal funds. And I believe that covers all of the information from our end. And so, Michelle, I'll turn that back to you. Oh, yes, the last slide, I'm sorry. This is thank you. This slide is where you would link to and can access the specific guidance and questions and answers and forms that give you more detail on the information that I presented. And if you haven't already done so, I would highly recommend that you print those three, particularly for you, the second two on the first one gives more general information, but it's important for you to know. The second two have to do more with the billing processes and the dispute of the claims that I just discussed.
Thanks so much, Pat. And this is Joe DiBartolo, and I'm the business administrator for you at Woodmere Schools. I'm having a little problem here, Michelle, with the taking over and advancing slides.
You should have the
Hello?
controls in your top row.
I am, and it's not advancing.
Okay, one moment, please.
Sure. Okay, you're reinitializing. Still don't have the controls were removed. Okay. We still don't have the top row.
Okay, should be momentarily now.
Okay, let's try it now. Still having a problem. Do you want? Oh, there it is. Okay, I think we're set now. Thank you so much, and thank you, Pat. Please know that the direction provided by SED has been a great help to school districts concerning billing for non-resident students. Well, Pat presented an overview of the regulations that relate to billing for non-resident students. I'm going to present an overview of the process our district has in place for collecting the information needed to prepare the billing. Since there are many ways a district may approach preparing the billing to non-resident students, the purpose of my presentation today is really just to provide an opportunity to stop and ask yourself, is your district approaching preparing your billing in the most efficient manner? Are you doing all you can to identify and recover costs? And are there things you might be doing that you might want to consider doing differently? And again, Pat, I'm having difficulty advancing my presentation. Michelle?
I will control it for you, Joe, per your direction.
Sure. What I do want to do is provide you, when slides come back up, with an overview of our district. Thank you. We're a public school in Nassau County in Southwest Quadrant. We're a moderate-sized district for our region with 5 schools and about 3,100 students. Unique to our region is that we have many families that opt to send their children to schools for religious education. And within our school district, we have 6 non-public schools with an enrollment of approximately 1,600 students, of which we provide 140 students with special education services, and only 20 are district residents. So just you could see how making sure that we could recover all the costs that we can is really important to our district. Last year for 08-09, recoverable costs ran about $850,000. So it's a significant number for us. Slide, please. Michelle, can you advance the slide? Thank you. Just to summarize the kind of services we provide, I'm sure they're very similar to what you would find in almost any district. We use district staff to provide a resource room, speech, language, and consultant teacher. We contract for OT and PT, and we use our BOCES, NASA BOCES, for psychological services in hearing and vision services. You could advance, please. A little bit, when the changes that resulted from the reauthorization of IDEA were going to be implemented, our district identified a need to develop practices and procedures that would help us gather the information to capture the costs associated with servicing the non-public school students. We really didn't want to be in a position where, when we started to think about what we needed to prepare invoices, was at the end of the school year. Especially the staff is gone, and it would really be, we felt, limited way to go back and recapture some of the information we might need. So I worked to develop some practices and procedures. I worked closely with our Assistant Superintendent for Business, Peter Weber, and our Executive Director of Special Education, Elizabeth McGuire. And together, we determined that our practice should really focus on really generating compliant billing, identifying and capturing all the recoverable costs we could. We wanted our process, when we collect data, to be able to leave us with the appropriate source documents, both to arrive at the amount we have to bill, to justify that, and also to assist with any kind of audit review that might occur. And we also wanted a system that would sort of drive on efficiencies. We wanted to know to what extent perhaps we could use our special education student management system, which we use IEP Direct, and we also wanted to collect data in report formats that would really drive right into the invoice preparation process. We didn't want to start recreating our reports for invoicing. Next slide, please. And I'll talk a little bit about data collection and how we go about collecting data, and then look at how we use that data in the reports to drive our invoice preparation. Slide. And I should note, that all the student data we're looking at today was created specifically for this report. So I guess, as Joe Friday would say, the names have been changed to protect the students in this case. Next slide. We use a small list of reports that we've developed, and the first report we list is something we called our Services Summary Report. And you can advance, please. And here's an example of it. And the next slide, please. And the Student Service Summary Report is a report that we use. It's a, you can advance. It's a direct download from IEP Direct into Excel, and it really, if you could go back 2, that would be appreciated. Sorry. It really summarizes in a snapshot form all of the relevant IESP information you really would need to go in and to do your billing at the end of the year. And it captures your student-specific information, name, date of birth, address and district of residence, as well as the specific services that are being provided, both the start and projected end date, the group size, the frequency, how many minutes the session meets, and the cycle. So you could really, I think, see at this point how a document like this could really be a great tool for when you get to the end of the year and you have to start approaching your invoice preparation. And I should note that even if it wouldn't be worth your while to develop a customized report and export it, or if your system wouldn't allow that, that perhaps even setting up a report like this and populating it with your student-specific information might be an easier way to work with that information than coming to the end of the year and just having a huge stack of IESPs on your desk and figuring how you take all that information and put it all together for invoice preparation. Slide. We use this report, and we since it captures services at a point in time, each month we review the report and we run it, and we want to look at what students we added and what students we dropped and where there were changes in the nature of the services. And what we'll do is just keep a notation of that, because at the end of the year we want to make sure that we capture that and we run our final report for billing. Next slide, please. The next report we've developed is just a student attendance report. The next slide, please. And what we really said is, for our own reassurance in our files for backup, we didn't know if just a teacher's attendance book would really be all the information we would want to look at how we were servicing students. So we developed this report, which is really a form our teachers fill out and submit monthly, and it really gives not only the student's attendance, but the detailed group information for that student. As you could see, who were they seeing with the group, what was the attendance in the group, and what was the amount of time that was in the group. This report has also become a very good tool for our special education director, because she may not be as in tune to what's going on as far as scheduling and group sizes in our non-public schools as she might in our public schools, because she's probably in them more frequent. So it's really helpful to her to review them, just to look at, we maximizing our group sizes, are we staffing our non-public schools correctly as students maybe move in, or etc. Next slide, please. The next report we developed is probably the one that's been the most helpful for us in data collection and for invoice preparation, and that's something we called our Student Service Report. And this is another report that's maintained by our district staff and is submitted monthly, and it really captures, it's a vehicle to capture all the specific CES matters and administrative functions that they do for students outside of the classroom, such as evaluations and testing and scoring and report writing and preparing for and attending CSEs. Next slide, please. And you can see that's really nothing more than a log sheet, the formalized log sheet they use, that for the student records what specific service they provided and how much time they allocated towards that. Next slide. And what we do each month, these reports are forwarded to the business office, and then what we do is we maintain an Excel sheet that's nothing more than recording all of these individual services and the time for our staff provides to non-public school students. And also on the sheet, when we receive invoices from our OT/PT providers, we will enter any type of administrative or CSE matter they assessed a fee for, such as if they were to provide an evaluation or if they were to attend a CSE. So perhaps you could see by maintaining this log and gathering this information throughout the year, when we come to the end of the school year, we have, a very comprehensive list of all the CSE type matters and administrative matters that we could apply for recoverable costs. Next page, please. And just here's an example of the Excel sheet that we maintain in the business office. And you can see how by adding to that every month, you really have that comprehensive list. Next slide, please. The next report that we've developed and we developed throughout the year is what we call our contracted services report. And our district contracts with OTPT providers, and what we have done is simply developed yet another Excel worksheet that as we receive invoices from OTPT providers, next slide please, we enter that information onto the sheet, and for each fee-based service that's provided, we capture it, and we capture it by the date, and we also capture it, you could see, give some information about the group type, was it individual or group, and then what was the number of minutes in the group. And again, you could envision that just by, monitoring this and updating it every month as we get invoices in, by the time we get to the end of the school year, we have, a comprehensive list in a very user-friendly format for billing of all the contracted services that were provided to our students. Also, I should say, by going to update this list each month when we get our invoices, it makes us focus on the invoice and lets us identify where we have might have any issues or clarifications we need to go back to the provider for. Next slide, please. So what I did do was just give you a quick overview of all the reports we use for data collection. And again, that was the Student Services, the Services Summary Report, which is the export from IEP Direct. And our teachers maintain both the attendance report and their student service report, which is their log. And the business office maintains the log of the service reports as well as the contracted service reports. Next slide, please. And what I'm going to do now is just give you an overview of how the reports that we use for data collection really are used for invoice preparation. Slide, please. And I think you could say, when I walked you through the limited reports we use for data collection, how they're all geared to that by when you reach the end of the school year, the business office will have in hand all the information we need to really start working on invoice preparation without really having to go back and even engage our special education department. Last year we did invoice preparation. We need very little information needs once we got to the end of the school year, and only limited needs to clarify some things at our special ed department. Next page, please. We start with running our June year-end reports of our our services summary report, which again is that export from IEP Direct. And what we will do is work with this report and all of our reports and show you how just by really reformatting them and sorting them, we'll really be able to drive into invoice preparation as well as supporting documents. Next slide, please. So here would be just a representative sample of, what our report would look like when we merged together each school's report and sorted it by provider. And you can see you really have a comprehensive snapshot of all the ISP services that were provided to that student. And we would go in and add in any information that may not be reflected on the June end report, such as a student who maybe was discontinued in earlier in the year, or there might have been a service level change. But those really seem to be minimal, and we just could add them in there on our Excel spreadsheet. Next page, please. And what I'm showing you here is how we take that report, and then we're going to copy it and reformat it. And we've added some columns you could see on the right-hand side, and therefore days and minutes of service. And again, by taking the individual non-public school calendars and matching it against the public school calendar, you could determine how many weeks a student would have been serviced and what their service level is. So you could figure out how many days of session they had, and by knowing the group size and the number of minutes in the group, you could determine what their minute allocation would be based on those number of days. And by sorting that by provider for each staff member, you could come up with the total number of minutes they allocated during the year for servicing all of their non-public school students. Next page, please. And then we're going to look at our student service report log. And this, you remember, is the log that we've been maintaining based upon the individual logs of services that our district staff member have been submitted into the business office. Next page, please. And as you can see here, just at the year end, by sorting our student services report log by provider, and we could easily then do a formula and get the total number of minutes each staff member spent providing CSE, attending to CSE matters for students and providing evaluations and related functions. So at this point, just by simply reformatting and sorting the reports we've been maintaining, we could come up with the total number of minutes each district staff member spent providing the IEP-related services to students, as well as the total number of minutes they spent attending to CSE administrative type functions that fall into reimbursable costs. Next slide, please. Then we will look at and determine the cost of the salary and benefits for each staff member that serviced non-public school students. And once we do that, we'll be able to take the information of the number of minutes that district staff members spent in total servicing non-public school students and figure out a cost per minute rate. Next slide, please. I should also note it's been a little easier for our district in that we have staff that either basically is assigned to working in the non-public schools and assigned to working in the public schools. But if that were not the case, we could just work with the FTE allocation of their non-public school assignment to come up with the salary and cost and benefits. But you can see here, we determine a total for salary and benefits. We have our total number of minutes that they've spent servicing students, and by dividing it out, we have a cost per minute to assess the cost of the district of providing services for each student. I should also note that what we have done is for our any employee that has a portion of their salary and benefits is charged to a federal grant, that we will also determine a cost per minute rate of an allocation to a federal grant. So when we apply our offset for the federal grants, we do it on a cost per minute of service. Some districts just might use a flat per student allocation against the service that was funded or to be funded through the federal grant. And I've had some conversations with SED about that, and they've advised that either method would be appropriate as long as you're consistent in how you use that method throughout your billing cycle. So let's go on to the next slide. And what we're now going to do is we have the total number of minutes, as you can see on the reports we work with, that staff members provided students for their services, and now we have the total cost per minute that our staff members are providing those services. So the next two slides will show you how we arrive at the cost for each student service. Let's advance to the next slide. And what we're going to do on this report is go back and revisit the report. We figured out the days and minutes of service, and by extending by formula the minutes, obviously at the cost per minute for the service, we have the cost of the district providing that service to each specific student. and if the student also was funded, was serviced by a district staff member who had a portion of their salary and benefits picked up in grants, we would also pick up the allocation that went into the grant. So you could see there, by just using the formula extension, now we know what we could bill a district of residence for our staff members that provided services to non-public school students. Next slide. And you can see how, going back on the next slide into our student services report log, and in the right-hand column, by extending in the formula, the cost per minute of service. We know the minutes of service. We know what the cost was for providing each CSE-related matter to students. And again, by sorting these two reports we looked at by district of residence and putting in a summation formula, you will have the total amount that you could invoice a district of residence. And I'll show you that shortly when we look at the specific invoice preparation. Let's advance to the next slide. So at this point, we're able to, we've determined how much the cost was for our own staff to provide services to non-public school students. And as you remember, throughout the year, we're maintaining a worksheet that captures all of the contracted services fees that we pay. Let's go to the next slide, please. And as you can see here, by just going back to our contracted services report and by entering a column and then putting in a formula that'll capture all of the fee entries from September through June, we have the cost that we paid to contract providers for providing services to each student in the non-public schools. So now we have really the total cost of providing our services outside of our BOCES services, and we'll bill those out once we get our final reports in from BOCES and can determine what the fees in excess, what we will be paying BOCES for those services, and we'll bill those separately. Next slide. So now we know the cost of servicing our students, and we know also what our deduct will be for any grant-funded allocations for servicing those students. So the last piece we want to get to prepare our billing would be the state aid deduct that we're going to have to apply for each student. And we're going to go back to, again, next slide, the services summary report, which again is that export we use from IEP Direct that captures all the student information and the outline of the IEP services. And by just formatting that report by student, you'll have a list of all the services that were prescribed by the IESP. And then we're going to modify that report and just add some columns. We'll add a column for hours per week, a column for the percent weighting for those services, FTE, and as well as total dollars spent for those services. And it's very easy to fill these out. When you look at the hours per week, well, you have your services there, and you can easily determine how many sessions a student received per week and what was the duration of those sessions. And you see the nature of the services there, and you'll have the hours per week, and you can determine if that student has a percentage weighting tied to them based upon the classification specified by SED. And then as far as the FTE, well, you could look at the start and end dates of services, and you know what portion of the year, how many weeks that they were serviced based upon their full year number of weeks serviced in that school. And finally, as far as the total cost, well, we have already calculated the total cost for all those services. So these are all the information, student-specific information that the district would need to arrive at in order to move through the state aid calculation. And let's advance to the next slide. As you probably are aware, that each year SED makes available to the school districts a formula, a sheet that lays out the formula to calculate the state aid attributable back for each student. Next slide. And here is an overview of that sheet. Perhaps if you're not familiar with it, you don't remember what it looked like. But it really walks you, step by step by step, how to calculate the public excise cost aid attributable to each parentally placed non-resident student. And what we do is simply take this sheet. Let's go to the next slide. And we replicate that on an Excel worksheet. And you can see the columns are lettered and numbered, and each letter and number references back to the specific line item on the SED sheet. And by simply, taking the information, you could sort it by student, come up with a list by district residents of the sheet that we just did all our work to figure out the hours and the percent weighting and the FTE and the total cost. By then cutting and pasting columns from that report into this report, you'll have, it'll calculate for you the state aid amount for the deduct for each student. So at this point, you really have all the pieces you need to prepare your invoice, both the amount to be invoices, the adjustments you need to make to the invoices for your grants and state aid, as well as sheets that really serve as justification down to the student in detail level to support the amount you're invoicing. So let's advance. We could actually advance 2 slides here. And I'm going to walk you through just invoice preparation. And here's a sample of an invoice that typically we would send to a school district. And what it does, as you could see, is it lists each service we provide and the total amount, the total cost of the district for providing that services. And then it shows an offset for our grant-funded piece and an offset for our estimated state aid. And what I'll do is just show you, as we walk through here, how each report we were working with, you'll see, not only shows the amount you're being invoiced, but it also gives you student-specific information to provide for justification for that amount. So the next slide will show you the information we will provide to justify the amount we're billing for our resource room and consultant teacher services. And again, you could just see how we drive everything off that initial report we use, we take from IEP Direct. The next slide is similar in nature. You could turn to the next slide, and that'll show you speech-language therapy. Our next slide, you could advance to the next slide, is for, in this case, OT, which is a contracted service, and we would provide, a number of sheets that would take you all the way through the end of the school year, but it would give you, again, the specific list of all the specific dates and types of services, as well as the total for that. The next 2 slides will just give you a representative sample of what and you can go to the next slide, please, of what the specific fees that you're being charged for the CSE-related matters and administrative functions, evaluations and attending CSEs, etc. Now, for this particular district, we were able to capture at the end of the year about 650 individual services. It's really been helpful, and I could say I really don't know if we didn't have a vehicle in place to really capture when we were providing these services, if we would have really been able to really be as thorough in identifying these services when it came to preparing our invoices. Next slide. And the last piece will really provide, state aid. We will give a copy of the calculation formula that's provided by SED. Next slide. Got a little ahead of myself. As well as the worksheet that shows how state aid was calculated for each student and each student's specific information. We would also provide copies of our district's state aid reports that reference back into the formula as well, so everybody at every number. And next slide is also just showing the total for the state aid on this report. And let's move to the final slide in this piece, and that would be just the summary of the salary and benefits paid to each provider for non-public school students that were district staff, as well as how we arrived at the rate, the dollar per minute for their to assess back to the district of residence. We also would provide, although I didn't show it here because it would look like just a sea of X's, a sheet by going back to our report that's the export from IEP Direct will provide a list of each specific student, their name and address that we identify as being in that district of residence, as well as we'll include on that information about how they need to follow up with the district in order to get a copy of an individual IESP should they want to see that. And of course, I should have mentioned all through my presentation that we're, updating both at the start of the year and at the end of the year, confirming with our special education department that we do have parental consent, that we could include each student we're working with on the invoice rather than have to go through the vehicle through SED. So this is really an overview of how our district has approached collecting the information to prepare our billing for non-public school students. And as I said at the start of my presentation, this is not the only way a district could go about doing it. It's probably not the best way a district could go about doing it, but it's certainly worked for us. And, I guess the intent of my portion of the presentation was just maybe to start giving a framework that districts may go back and think about their process and to see perhaps if there's not ways they might be able to improve upon the practices and procedures they have in place to really gather the information they need to do for compliant non-public school billing. And the last slide I've included is just really my contact information, and certainly I would welcome anybody who might want to contact me to discuss things more specifically, or actually get a copy of the Excel sheet we use as the formulas in it, if that's helpful, and would really, again, welcome the opportunity to do that. And I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share an overview of how we go about billing for non-public schools with you today.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Joe and Pat. And we are at our question and answer session, and we do have 2 questions to work with, but certainly want to give Michelle a chance to let all of you know how you can ask questions and if you'd like to do an audio question.
Thanks, Donna. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who would like to ask an audio question, please press number 7 followed by the pound key on your telephone now, and you'll be placed in a queue in the order received. Again, 7 pound to ask an audio question.
Okay, thank you. Now, our first question comes from Peter Folan, and Peter says, is parental consent or refusal to share information required to be in writing from the parent?
Pat, do you want to handle that?
Hi, this is Pat. When a parent refuses consent, the district should get that in writing? Yes.
Okay. So even consent and or refusal, either way?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Joe, how do you go about getting that? Have you had that situation?
Yeah, I believe our special ed department each year, sends out forms to parents to get them back on file, and I know they have to be pretty diligent in following up on that. And it was an issue. I think the first year we really saw the implementation of IDEA, and it's something that, again, from the business office perspective, I'm asking that question and always confirming that. We have yet to have a parent who did not give consent, but certainly it's something I'm mindful of when I'm approaching and working on my billing.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Mary Gibson, and Mary says, what is the correct procedure to charge the federal allocation to the IDEA grant?
Pat, do you want to address that?
I'm not sure I understand what the question is.
I think.
What is the proportionate share?
I'm reading it more of, I believe, when you get to the perhaps the when you're actually preparing the invoice and billing back, do you use a proportionate share? Do you is there a method for allocating the amount of the grant funds back to the student?
Okay. On the website, we do provide the proportionate share information, so we have done some of that calculation out for you. what your proportionate share would be for parentally placed students with disabilities. The reason that I went over with you briefly the discussions that have to occur around how you're going to expend those dollars is if in the consultation process you say for every student you're going to spend X amount of dollars regardless, that's the way to go about it. But another way to go about it is to identify a particular service. So if the decision is made through the consultation process that you're only going to spend the federal dollars on speech and language services, then only those students who would receive those speech and language services would have that deducted from their bills back to the district of residence. So it really depends on that consultation process. So that's why I said from a business perspective, I think you would need to know what decisions were made here. And the forms that we provide give you you do have to subtract that. And you do have to have record keeping to be able to verify that you've expended all of those federal dollars on the parentally placed students.
And I think
if I could just add, in New York, because we provide so many more services than under the federal requirement, where services would be limited to the federal amount, expending the dollars is probably not the issue. It's just how you're going to reflect that subtraction in your bill back, because you can't take the money but not subtract it back when you bill the district of residence.
Yeah.
And I would add that you have to be careful because you can't you can't use the federal dollars for the cost of evaluations.
I think that was an excellent question. It's a question I remember when I first started doing billing first time around, I actually called SED and got some direction on. And, at that time, the response I got was if you wanted to provide a proportional share to each student receiving a service that's being funded through federal grants, that would be appropriate. And as well, if you wanted to determine how you actually are expending that grant against, say, student providers as we do, that also would be appropriate. Again, it was just being consistent in how you're allocating those dollars.
Okay, thank you. And then, Mary, if there was other information you were looking for, please send us a question. We have another question from Peter Fullen, and Peter wants to know how much time does Hewlett-Woodmere spend on an annual basis preparing and tracking such information and preparing reports and billings? And how much is this time in terms of dollars, and do you attempt to recover this expense from the district of residence?
An interesting question. I mean, one of the things we've tried to do is make our process as efficient as possible by doing such things as using reports that download and trying to not have to recreate reports when we get to billing. While there is time involved, I think there's time involved in any method you go about trying to organize all the information you need and actually generate your billing. We have gotten our system down to where I could say it's a few hours a month at least in the business office just to update our reports. And I'm inclined to think that if we had waited to the end of the school year and just had a stack of IESPs and invoices and maybe login sheets from CSE meetings, that it might be equally, if not more time. So there is a time element, but again, I think if you have a system and a process and you work at it, it becomes more efficient. As far as can you bill for this time, no, that's an administrative expense that actually a district cannot bill for. Because it's not specifically CSE related, or it's falls outside of general administrative, is not a recoverable expense. But I guess to a certain degree that every district is doing that. But unfortunately, you can't recover those costs. But again, we try to make it as efficient as possible. So I hope that's some answer to that question.
Okay, and then I think you answered it. Peter said he was just asking about the business expense, and you did relate that it is the business office expense. So there are no other questions that have come in. Pat, is there anything else that you can think of that our listeners should know, or anything that Joe said that maybe triggered some information?
No, I think Joe did an excellent job. The only thing I could share for informational purposes, when I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we are seeking some changes to this process, it's in recognition of just the scope of work that is involved in doing student-specific calculations like this for these students. And so SED's original proposed legislation and the one that we did some further work on would propose that we are able to set some rates, some regional rates, or calculation or formula to calculate regional rates for some identified services, so that it would lessen the burden for these specific costs. So, for example, we might be able to establish a reasonable regional rate for Committee on Special Ed meetings. That would take some of this burden away, or certain related services. We wouldn't be able to do it for all of the services, but that's one of the processes that we were seeking legislation to do in order to offset the costs that you cannot recoup from the District of Residence.
And when do you think, where is that legislation now?
Well, that was proposed last year to the in our IDEA bill that we put forth to the legislature, and it'll come back up again this year. So it's we say it's across the street. It's not across the street to you. It's across the street.
Right.
It's been a bill that's been submitted and will be resubmitted this year.
Okay.
For legislative action.
Good. Now, do your colleagues have anything they'd like to add?
Pardon?
Do your colleagues have anything they'd like to add or bring up?
No. Joe did a great job.
Yeah, you did, Joe.
Pat did a great job.
Okay.
I have to say that part.
Okay, Joe, anything else that
other than, I think it's just might be worthwhile just to stop and think about how districts approach this. And it's nice to have the opportunity through the webinars to really hear and see what other people are doing and really share so much. It's a nice opportunity for school business officials to really keep on top of things and to just learn more. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate today.
Well, I thank all of you for participating as speakers and as viewers. And we did provide Joe's packet of charts for you, but if you'd rather have the actual Excel, certainly you have Joe's information here that you can get for him. Thank you all for attending. We have some other webinars coming up towards the end of the month. I know many people will be off on vacation. Certainly have a good vacation, a good President's Day. Stay warm, and look forward to talking with you at our next NIASBO event. Thank you all for attending.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's New York State ASBO webinar.